What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Lettermen Row. It's quarterback week. You guys already know that. We just did on Wednesday a massive breakdown of the quarterback room on the Lettermen Row YouTube channel. We've been rolling along with quarterback week all week long at lettermenrow.com, where you can get that coverage $1 for your first 2 months. Andy Backstrom in the middle of your screen, Tim May, the 41-year vet, over on the other side of your screen, and I'm Spencer Holbrook. All right, it's the end of the week. That means we're going to make some predictions here on the quarterback room, fellas. Tim, I'll start with you. Who is going to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State and why?
Okay, now you got to understand something. This is not necessarily my opinion. It's my opinion based on watching Ryan Day pick starting quarterbacks over the years, because ultimately it is the head coach who makes the final call. Chip Kelly, of course, will have a lot to say about it, but I'm going to lean like I have been through this whole thing, even though I very much like Devin Brown. He seems to be a guy that a lot of people just like to beat on for some reason or another. I'm going to go with Will Howard for the opening game of the year, barring injury, because he's got 20 more starts than anybody else in the room, maybe more than that. Number two, he did help lead his team to a conference championship a couple of years ago at Kansas State, made plays, etc. We haven't seen his best yet because, as I pointed out in the earlier video, he hasn't really had the shackles taken off where he can just take off and run the way that is part and parcel to his game and is part and parcel to a Chip Kelly style offense. So based on experience, based on the fact that there's an urgency about Will Howard needing to play as a senior or a last guy. And then number three, I think, uh, he's just the fact that he's been a starter is going to weigh heavily as Ryan Day makes this call. But as I've told you many times, I think at least two more guys are going to play and maybe play a lot in those first several games. But Will Howard, my answer, I'm sticking with it.
Andy?
Yeah, very similar thought process for me. I'm also going with Will Howard for week one. I think that he's a guy that has, like you said, Tim, 27 starts under his belt. That's an uphill battle for Devin Brown, for Julian Saint, anyone else in that room. It's just hard to compete with that. And like you said, Ryan Day's history, if it's a close call, it's going to be experience. Last year, the experience of even Kyle McCord, who had just one career start, ended up tipping the scale there. And I think with Will Howard, not only does he have the experience, he has the dual threat ability, I think, more than any of the other quarterbacks in the room, which they've just talked about time and time again, wanting the quarterback to run in this offense now with Chip Kelly there, who's going to make it happen. It's not just going to be a want, it's going to be a need. It's something that's going to actually be utilized. I think that also leans toward Will Howard. I will say, though, that he's got to be more consistent than he was at Kansas State. And I think that there will be more of an evaluation throughout the season. I don't think that being named week one starter means he is the starter for all of 2024. But I do believe that he will be the guy trotting out there to start week one, just like he was the guy coming out to start the spring game after we saw Devin Brown leading quarterback drills throughout most of the spring.
Yeah, I'll make it 3 for 3 here. I'm going to go Will.
And by the way, I was in the congregation for that preach, and I would like to say amen. Go ahead now.
I'm going to make it 3 for 3 and go with Will Howard as well. I just think it's the experience factor. Like, this is a guy who, has he been the best quarterback in the Big 12 in any year? I don't think so, but he won a Big 12 championship. He knows what it's like to be in the locker room. He's got 48 career touchdown passes. Yeah, there's 25 interceptions, but that's kind of front-loaded a little bit, a little inconsistent during his time. I think that has to do with, if I gave Ohio State fans a poll of who was Will Howard's best weapon at Kansas State, I think you're going to get a few different answers, but I think there's going to be maybe 80% of participants wouldn't be able to answer because his two best weapons were Deuce Vaughn, who is a 5'8" scat back, who's now is he active with the Cowboys or is he just on the practice squad? Either way, like, that's not a high level NFL player. And then his other best weapon was Malik Knowles, a wide receiver who, good college player, not an NFL athlete. There are NFL athletes all over this offense. And so if you put a guy with experience and you hand the keys to somebody with experience, and not Kyle McCord experience, but Will Howard experience, 4 years of starting, in with this offense and these weapons, I think it's almost a little bit more plug and play than any of the other four. And that's why I think it's not just Ryan Day taking the safe option. It's Ryan Day taking the smart option with what you've got and what you need from your offense when you've got a defense like this. There's no reason to risk doing something stupid and start somebody. And I'm not saying the other guys would be a stupid option, but I think that Will Howard is the smart option with what you're playing. That's why I think that I'm going to go and make it 3 for 3 with Will Howard. Any further thoughts, Tim, on Will Howard? As Lettermen Row has named him the May 23rd starter. That doesn't mean Ohio State has yet.
Yeah, exactly. Number one, number two, Devin Brown is in this to win. Is in it to win it. Is in this to win it. That doesn't rhyme like in it to win it. This is not going to be handed to Will Howard. If it was, it would have already been handed to Will Howard, right? Number three, these freshmen, man, especially Julian Sayin. I know I talked to Bear Nolan the other day only because Aaron Nolan's gotten a lot of short shrift. I just saw him operate in the one real true public outing. I saw him operate extremely well and drive his team down the field for touchdowns. I keep going back to that. Ryan Day missed having 50 touchdowns last year. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what he wants for this team more than anything else, because if you couple a great defense, like maybe the best defense we've seen here, at least in a decade possibly, with a high-powered offense that scores 50 touchdowns, that's going to be hard to beat. But if it's struggling to score touchdowns, you're going to see changes at quarterback. I do believe. You got Devin Brown sitting there. You've got Julian Sayin, who, except for the spring game, by every other person's description, is ready to rock and roll. Like you said, if he puts on a few more pounds, couple of 10 pounds, he's ready to rock and roll. And he's talented. He's got one of the more talented arms you and I and everyone else has ever seen come through or come to Ohio State. So this idea that it's Will Howard, so he can sit back, and I don't believe he's going to do that. But the thing I like about Will Howard more than anything else, it's like talking to Seth McLaughlin, the transfer center from Alabama. You're talking to what did Urban Meyer call him? You're talking to grown-ass men, man. I mean, these guys are mature. They just seem like adults, big-time adults. Devin Brown does too, but I'm just talking about the experience factor and everything else. That's why you got to lean toward Will Howard at this point.
Andy?
I think Devin Brown, if you look back, he threw 28 passes last year, but 2 of them were touchdowns that traveled 20 or more yards through the air, and they might have been 2 of the best passes that an Ohio State quarterback threw last year. One was a touchdown to Carnell Tate in our garbage time section of that game against Western Kentucky. There was just kind of a dart to the opposite pylon for a touchdown. And then the other one was a 58-yard touchdown to Brandon Inniss in the Purdue game that was on a slot fade against cover 0 and put it right where he needed to. And Brandon Inniss kind of took care of the rest from there. So clearly the arm talent is there for Devin Brown. It's always been a case of consistency. I think the dual threat ability of him was kind of talked about maybe too much. Not that he can't run. It's just that I think he has a better arm than people give him credit for. And I think we saw that this spring. We saw that a little bit last year when he had the opportunity to. I think that's his biggest strength over Will Howard in this case. Like, I think if he's going to beat Will Howard out, it's going to be because he has a better arm than Will Howard. I think the strength that Will Howard has over Devin Brown is that he's a much better athlete. And I think that for Will Howard, my stance on it, the most success he could have at Ohio State is if they lean into his athleticism. And I'm not saying they need to use him like they used JT Barrett back in the day, because Chip Kelly's already said they're not going to be having quarterback powers, quarterback ISOs, stuff like that maybe you saw with JT Barrett. But they need to be able to rely on his legs, and he needs to lean into that, because I know when he first got to Ohio State, he kind of pushed back on the fact that he's not a running quarterback and show his arm. Well, yeah, his arm's going to be important, but I think he needs to confidently lean into his legs if he's going to have a full season of success at Ohio State.
It is May 23rd, which means it's the perfect time to make a season-long prediction for the Ohio State quarterback room. Not that it is the perfect time, but it's the time we're going to do it. And it's going to suck for all of us because if they're wrong, then whatever. And we'll have a better description of probably the cornerback room and the safety room in 7 or 8 weeks when we get there, because we'll be closer to the season. But this is when quarterback week fell. This is the schedule that we created. So on May 23rd, we get to make big season-long predictions for the Ohio State quarterback room. Tim, you got one. You get one bold prediction for the 5-man quarterback room at Ohio State in 2024 for this season. What is your 2024 Ohio State quarterback's bold prediction?
Bold prediction is we're going to see 3 guys play. Yeah, my bold prediction is we're going to see 3 guys play a lot, I think, in those first several games. And that first off week is going to be interesting.
Andy?
Yeah, kind of protecting myself here, but I'm going to say 45% chance, just under 50, 45, there will be a different starting quarterback at the end of the season than there is at the start of the season. I think that, like Tim said, there's going to be an evaluation process for this. And if it's not getting done, if they're not scoring, it's not just winning games. If they're not winning games handily and they're not scoring touchdowns on touchdowns on touchdowns, there will be a change. And I think that there will be no holding back this time, because just as much as this is also Will Howard's last shot, this is maybe Ryan Day's last shot in some ways, at least in terms of selling himself to this fan base and showing that he can do this. And I think that he knows that, and his staff knows that, and everyone knows that. So there's going to be no punches held back at this point. If it's not getting done, they're going to make a change. So I'm putting it at 45%, just under 50, that there will be a different starting quarterback by the end of the season.
Wow, you guys are really being diplomatic here with these predictions. I'm just going to go for it. We talk so much about making changes midway through the season and stuff. Well, what if that doesn't happen? If that doesn't happen and the Ohio State defense is stifling and given this offense short fields to work with, which I expect in bunches this year, if this offense is rolling with the running game with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, they're going to score a lot of touchdowns, whether they're throwing 0 passes or 75 passes. So I think that this offense is going to be just fine no matter who the starter is there. With that being said, if it's Will Howard, my bold prediction for the season is Will Howard's going to have at least 10 rushing touchdowns. And that's because if you pull the ball inside the 5 and he just, kind of darts into the end zone, it counts. And he had more rushing touchdowns with each season he played at Kansas State. And the more rushing touchdowns he had, the higher the scoring output was each year for Kansas State. So they had averaged 26 points a game his freshman year. They averaged 28 his sophomore year, 32 his junior year, and last year, his senior year, they averaged 37 points a game. Well, guess what? His rushing touchdown total went up in each of those years. Well, the Ohio State offense has plenty of weapons to work with, and then you add his legs into the mix and his ability to find pay dirt with his legs, and I think he's going to have double-digit touchdown runs because they're going to get creative with how they use him in the red zone. They are sick and tired of being bad in the red zone. And I think you're going to see the quarterback run in the red zone. Hey, newsflash, you don't have to bring Devin Brown in anymore in that regard if Will Howard's the starter, like you did last year with Kyle McCord. You can keep the starting quarterback in there, keep a defense still on its toes much more than when you brought in a gadget quarterback last year. And then you can start to really make some hay there in the red zone. I think Will Howard's going to have double-digit rushing touchdowns. That's my bold prediction. So it's just what I think. Tim?
He's all in on Will Howard. All in.
I just think that
that's a really good prediction. I mean, I think that's the difference between this football team this year and last year is that they've got a quarterback who can and will run. And when he does, he's really good at it. That's been missing for a while. And like I said, look at Chip Kelly and his offenses over the years. They're predicated on having that guy who can pull it down and go and will go, and that's what Will Howard gives you, the will.
Andy, I think if you name Will Howard the starter, and we all three predicted that week 1 he will be the starter. So we're going to operate for this video under the assumption that he is the week 1 starter. Well, the 3 opponents that you play to start the season, I don't think you're going to have much resistance there. And from there, it's almost like a snowball. So I understand that wanting to see the other quarterbacks and the potential to make a change if you're not scoring touchdowns. But what if you are racking up touchdowns against these lowly opponents? Like Akron's going to be really bad. Like that's just the facts. Akron is not good. And like Marshall is expected to have a down year. Western Michigan is not supposed to be one of the best teams in the MAC this year. Like if you're racking up touchdowns, that just creates momentum. And you can't just go pull the rug out from a quarterback that has momentum. So that will continue to build. And so if we are operating under the assumption Will Howard's going to be the starter, then the legs are a big reason why. And so I don't see a reason to hold back on a Will Howard centric prediction if I've already early in the show predicted that he's going to be the starter. Andy.
Yeah, no, it's a good prediction. If he's the start of the full season, I agree with you. I think he'll get to double-digit rushing touchdowns. I mean, JT Barrett did it multiple times at Ohio State, so I think that's totally possible. I also think that the reason why I am kind of flirting with this potential change is not that I'm rooting for an injury or anything like that, but we have to look at the facts here. The facts are that yes, Will Howard has starting experience in 4 different seasons, but only one of those seasons he started a full season, and that was last year. And in one of those games, he got benched mid-game for a really exciting true freshman that came in and ran for 5 touchdowns, and then there was a debate about who should be the starter the rest of the year. Now, Will Howard started the rest of the year, hit the portal, now he's at Ohio State. So that is just one reality of the situation. He only has 1 full year starting under his belt. And then Devin Brown has an injury history. And so if he wins the job, there's, of course, the possibility that maybe something with durability comes up again. So that's where I'm thinking right there why there could be more than one guy starting all these games. The other part of the equation is that Ryan Day has talked about how this could be a 16, 17 game season. And with that, there's more injury risk of, factoring into any of these positions where, as Tim said, might take a couple guys. He always references the 2014 season where it took 3 quarterbacks, of course. And so that's just another thing that I always think about with this discussion is that it might not be because someone's playing poorly that they make a switch. It might be because of injury. It might be because they're playing poorly. And I agree with you, Spencer. If there's momentum in those early games, there won't be a change. Where there would be a change for me is right after that Oregon game where there's another off week, which is weird because Ohio State has 2 off weeks this season. And you have a chance before that Nebraska game, you have a full week to reassess. If Will Howard's the starter week 1 and does well at the beginning of the season, but does not play well against Oregon, and you have a chance there to take a deep breath and say, hey, is this the time to make a change? Maybe that is the time, because if you're looking at it, it's not like previous seasons where you lose 1 game and potentially you're out of college football playoff contention. There's 12 teams in the playoff now. It's more like the NFL. So you can lose a game and still reassess and get back on course with a different plan of action. And that's why I think this is more complex than maybe in seasons past, where you make a starter call in week 1 and then you're probably sticking with it.
Tim, you got anything?
I agree. I mean, I think it's way up in the air. But like I said, yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, I think this thing is up in the air, headed toward the opening of preseason camp, and I think Will Howard's going to be the guy for that starting job for the first game. But none of these guys said, "This is my job. Come take it away from me in the spring," as we talked about on the earlier video. So it's up to Will Howard to hit the ground running and keep running and throw it.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. The bold predictions for the quarterback room, which are way early, way bold. Well, some of them are bold. And there you can go take it to the bank, I guess, if you would like to, but I wouldn't.
One of them is.
Yeah, this is not betting advice. So for Tim May on the other side of that screen, the 41-year vet over in Indianapolis covering the Indy 500, for Andy Backstrom over there on the other side of Columbus covering Ohio State, I'm just Spencer Olbrook. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And thanks for following along. Full coverage of quarterback week. Next week, diving into another position group. Come back to lettermenrow.com, find out which group we're going to break down next week, and then we'll keep going from there. The next 8 weeks are going to be a lot of fun. We'll see you guys over at lettermenrow.com.